back to Shift Remote. This is the second in our 12-part series where we bring together some of the brightest minds online for you, our incredible listeners, wherever you are in the world. As I said, this is the second in our 12-part series. In a couple of days' time, on the 9th, you can join us again for our third. We'll be looking specifically at JavaScript. And if you haven't already registered for that, please do that now before we crack on. However, today we'll be focusing specifically on the front end. We've got a great lineup of people ready to speak to you wherever you are in the world. As ever, please engage with us using the chat function or the comment section. How this is going to work is we've got about 2.5 hours together. In about an hour and a half, we'll take time for a break, so that's your chance to pop off and do whatever you need to do. As always, use the hashtag ShiftRemote and get connected and stay with us. We've got a great lineup. You will love it. I will love it too. Let's get cracking then, and how to get started today is I'd love to say thank you to our sponsors, without whom none of this would have been possible. So a huge thank you goes out to the team at Microsoft, at Infobit, Autodesk, Microblink, Barrage, Azure Idea, ICT, Zapania, Venture, Pseudocode, 5, Arts Futura, Nanobit, Infinuum, 9dots, Get by Bus, Aspira, Code Anywhere, and Pluggy. Thank you so much. Your support means everything. So to get us started then, let's introduce the man behind it all, say a few words. I love it when he speaks. Let's welcome Ivon Bazin.
Hey everyone, and welcome back to our new episode of Shift Remote. This is the second in the series of 12 events, although I sort of feel like it's actually the first quote-unquote real one. That being said, the first one was sort of a pilot to see how you'd all react to the event, and it's been super exciting. The feedback has just been awesome, and since then the entire team has been working really hard to set up the speakers, the agenda, the timeline, and everything. So the next 10 events after this one go all the way up till December. I mean, almost Christmas. So there's a lot of stuff to get through throughout these events. The best thing that actually happened is that we have now over 60 speakers that have confirmed that are in the agenda, and these are amazing people. Amazing. I've tried to get them for years to our in-person event. Fortunately, couldn't make them for some reason. Now, at least one thing good out of this entire situation, we have them here for Shift Remote. Our in-person event is coming up in Split, Croatia. I hope a lot of you will make it over. We do understand that it's not the best time to travel for all people. That being said, we will be giving out virtual tickets for those people that can't. But again, those that can't, we do hope you come. Tickets have a small amount of availability because we want to take care of all the precautions and whatnot. So if you are planning to come, please do get your tickets as soon as possible. So that's pretty much it. Here's our second event at Shift Remote starting about now. So see you all later. Have fun.
Thank you, Ivon. And moving on, let's get started with our first speaker. Henry's a freelance developer who's turned his interest into a passionate mix of site performance engineering and pinches of user experience. When not reading the deluge of daily research documents and case studies or auditing sites and dev tools, Henry can be found contributing back to the community. Toronto Web Performance Group Meetup and Jamstack Toronto organizer, and curating conference content or volunteering his time for lunch and learns at various boot camps. Additionally, you can find him frequenting conferences such as ours and touching base with the community, all with a radiant smile. I love that. Sounds like a nice guy. He's otherwise focused on running the fastest 5K possible. Surprise, surprise, we're in for a treat. Let's welcome Henry Helvetica.
Good day, or should I say, for anyone who follows me, good morning, Dom. But since I'm in a new part of the world, I'm going to have to say this. Dobro jutro, Dom. I hope I said that right, but regardless, hello. As you just heard, my name is Henri. That's how you pronounce it if you can, Henri. If you're not French, I am French speaking. This is my Twitter handle, Henri Helvetica. it is in includes not my real name, but it is my real IG handle as well. So if you ever want to reach me on Twitter or reach me on Instagram, you could do it here. As you just heard, I'm from the greatest city on the planet called Toronto. It's in Canada. And for those who don't know much about Toronto, I'll give you a little secret. Commodore was founded in Toronto, for anyone who remembers the Commodore 64. But I'll give you another gem. Toronto is home to one of the greatest Caribbean festivals on the planet. It's called Caravana. If you're ever in Toronto in August, come check it out. I'll take you out. You'll love it. And as you just heard as well, I like to spend a little bit of time running, a bit of a distance runner, 5-10K. So I've been sharing my story with hashtag devs who run. So if you see me sharing some pictures and that hashtag, that's me. If you're a runner as well, let me know, throw out an emoji out there or share your story on Twitter as well with that hashtag. Now, with that said, let's get going. I first want to thank everyone from the ShiftConf for the remote edition for inviting me. It was an honor. So welcome to my event, I'll call it. It's called Moving Pictures, a snapshot of the future of web media. Now, it's a bit of a double entendre. We're moving pictures as in we're moving pictures across the web. But the web is actually getting filled up with a lot of video these days. So I'm also calling it moving pictures, as we're going to talk about video and still images because they both make up media. Lastly, if there are any Canadians out there, you might recognize this because it's from a Rush album cover called Moving Pictures. I just thought it was perfect. Anyhow, let's get going. Now, I'm a bit of a raconteur, so this is going to be a little story. And this story starts pretty much here. The internet. Surprise, surprise. But specifically, it started February 1993 in a cold winter night at the National Center for Supercomputing Applications. Where is that? That's in Illinois. That's in the US. Now, this was specifically taking place at the Mosaic little cubicle office where that infamous browser was being developed. And they were having a conversation. And there was a proposal to add a new HTML element. And that was going to be the image tag, IMG. And the email that was actually circulated read specifically like this. I'd like to propose a new optional HTML tag, IMG. And that was actually by Mark Andreessen, the email. There's a link to the actual email. You'll be able to read it. And that's the actual tag for timestamps and everything. So February 25th, 1993, 9:09 p.m. Would you believe that's 9,994 days ago? Time flies. But let's get down to it. We're talking about images. Now, it's kind of hard to imagine that in 2020, the net without images, it's almost inconceivable. But in 1995, the internet was virtually just an academic platform, all text. So when this image tag was sort of proposed, it wasn't met with the warmest of sort of feelings. In fact, Tim Berners-Lee was not all that impressed with the idea. There was discussions that there possibly would be maybe some unsavory content being shared on the internet at the time. But ultimately, Mark Andreessen believed that it would promote experimentation. A lot of designers, web designers, they were called at the time, were very sort of pleased with the idea. So experimentation happened and the web moved forward. And we found ourselves in 1995, HTML 2.0, the image tag was added to the specification. Now, it'd be hard to talk about images without doing a bit of a retrospective. So what I'm going to do is take a few minutes to sort of cycle through some of the main image formats that we have, what they do best, and so forth. Another fine Canadian right there, as you can see. So let's talk about yes, I said it, the GIF, or GIF, whatever you want to call it. But what it's really called is the graphics interchange format. Now, would you believe that the GIF is 33 years old? Yeah, It's a little long in the tooth. But let's cycle through some of this specs. Lossless, absolutely. At the time, 256 colors, because really monitors at the time really could only handle that much. It had a transparency channel, not an alpha, so there was no yes, it was a transparency channel. Pardon me, I just blanked out. Obviously, the GIF is known for its animation, so we know that. And today, like I said, 33 years later, it's just simply an old codec. It's not the most efficient format possible. We're going to talk a little later as well about one of the main issues with the GIF, which was patent issues. In fact, the patent issue brought about the accelerated interest in a new format, which was the PNG. The PNG, portable network graphic, believe it or not, it's actually 23 years old. But again, an improvement from the GIF. And what happened? We ended up getting an alpha channel and not just straight transparency. Another lossless format, way more prevalent than the GIF. And believe it or not, at one point, just to troll the GIF people, they used to call it the ping, which stood for PNG is not GIF. Ha 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 ha. Regardless, the PNG would go on to be a well-regarded format. Somewhere around 20% of the images on the net are pings. Now let's talk about the JPEG. Now the JPEG is essentially the workhorse of the internet right now. Workhorse of images being shared, essentially. What that stands for is the Joint Photographic Experts Group. And it's actually turning 28 in about 2 months. So right now it's in its late 20s specifically. But what did we like about the JPEG? Well, it was a lossy format. And a lossy format at this time, or at least in its sort of like ascension, was key on the internet because we were going to get a compressed image, which was going to be photographic, obviously, great gradients associated with that. And like I said, it started to address the need for small file sizes online. Now, as I said, it is the workhorse. Pretty much every smartphone, every camera comes out as a picture comes out as a JPEG. Now, let's talk about quickly a new format or newer format called the WebP. Now, I'm going to spend a little bit of time later on during my presentation in getting into the details of the WebP, but it's kind of important. But the WebP is actually 10 years old. Interestingly enough, it is lossy and lossless. It has a transparency channel, smaller than GIF, smaller than JPEG, supports animation. But the WebP, the special thing about it is that it was actually made for the internet. So it has the specs that made it so friendly to internet transmissions down the wire. Also, not to get into the hairs, but it also featured chroma subsampling at 420. You'll be able to look that up. But it's the youngster of the crew. But combined, honestly, all these images, they're about as old as like the Rolling Stones, like really old. And that comes with concerns. You have an old format, you have old codecs, and ultimately, these things turn into things like cost. Large formats cost money, whether you're the content author sending it down the wire, or you're the user taking the data down the wire to your device. There's congestion, obviously. There's so much data going back and forth. And obviously, like I said, we have some old codecs. And with newer formats, you're probably going to get more computing power and obviously better compression. And compression is so important. Essentially, compression, this is actually a great reminder of how important compression is, because you do not get, with a proper codec and good compression, you won't get things like artifacts, which again, you can see right there. Now, here's the important part. Image compression is critical. Now, to digital photography, it is vital because you'll end up with something like a 12 megapixel image, that would take about 36 megabytes of storage, making most websites prohibitively large. And that's a quote you'll be able to read from an article. But ultimately, the internet, It's a beautiful quote that I love here from Colt McCandless from Google. The foundation of the whole internet is data compression. So let's talk about that. Now, it'd be hard to, again, talk about images, moving pictures without talking about bandwidth. Bandwidth is so key, and essentially right now, today, we're experiencing why bandwidth is key. You might look at this and be like, that looks like a germ. Well, really, COVID brought out a lot of things. COVID brought out our dependency on the internet, essentially. And we've seen that with this wave of work from home, traffic through the net has increased dramatically. In fact, you may remember this article and this moment mid-March where the European Union asked certain content providers like YouTube and Netflix to cut the quality of their streams because they were preparing for what was going to be a large work from home sort of like movement, and people just being at home, being on the internet. So Netflix went ahead, agreed, and they developed, tested, deployed a way to reduce Netflix traffic on these networks by about a quarter, with Italy and Spain being some of the key targets early on because they got hit very early. Now, if you look at some more data, you can see a chart here from Fastly showing you in a 6-week period that ended at the end of March, you have some of the key countries and some of the internet traffic that shot through the roof, with Italy going as far as almost 100% change, with a few of those countries not experiencing some degraded downloads, but the majority, as you can tell, were experiencing some poor download as well. Now, I had to throw that in because this was an interesting stat. A small content creator site like OnlyFans had a lot of new signups, but which also meant that they were going to experience a surge of content being created all on video. So these are things that engineers had to start to grapple with right away. Now you might think to yourself, like, we're a year away from the Tokyo Olympics in 2021. Why would I have such a slide? Well, let me tell you. For anyone familiar with 1080p resolution, which is pretty clear, do you know that 4K is essentially 4 1080p feeds? Okay. Do you know that 8K is actually 4 4K feeds? All right. Well, next year in 2021, the Tokyo Olympics plan on streaming the Olympics in 8K. That's going to be a lot of data. Now, we'll have to talk about costs. Now, obviously, we have costs of like sending data down the wire. We talked about that, whether it be like Netflix sending you all the information, all the data for like whatever film, or you taking that information down, coming down the wire again as data. But don't forget, there are things like patents and royalties. And in fact, I talked about it earlier, the PNG came about as a patent dispute with the GIF. Some of you might be familiar with HEVC. Again, a great video format, but patent laden, and it never really took off like it should have, even though it had fantastic technical specs. Now, we also have things like screen resolutions that we have to take care of. We know that the majority of the planet accesses the internet on mobile first. And in fact, I was looking at some data. If you can see Croatia right here, 8 out of 10 users literally are on mobile. That's a lot of data going down the wire to small screens, and we don't even know how powerful these devices are. Let's cycle through some stats real quick. You can see here at P75, the images per page are about 2.5 megs. At 90, it's almost 5. And in fact, if you look at some of the images per format, you can see again the workhorse being the JPEG, a runaway winner here. So with that being said, we're going to talk about raster images, JPEG pings, WebP GIFs, not SVG so much. And seeing that the JPEG is the most abundant format, it's also going to provide the most abundant savings. So let's talk about the future. And the future is going to start looking like this. something called the JPEG XL. Now, the JPEG XL came about on the 25th anniversary of the JPEG. There's a call for paper. 7 submissions were made, two were selected. They were PIK, P-I-K, and FWIF, which stands for Free Universal Image Format by Cloudinary. PIK was actually being worked on by Google at the time because they felt that the JPEG was getting long in the tooth. So what makes the JPEG XL so special when it's going to come out? Well, a myriad of things, like it's going to have an alpha channel, which we know about. It's going to be lossless, perceptually lossless, so it's not a fully lossless format, but visually you'll be incapable of seeing the difference. Modern compression, animation, obviously, high bit depth. It's going to be legacy friendly, backward compatible, universal in the sense that it's planning to replace all the formats, taking the best features from every format and bringing it into one. And it's also going to be responsive. Now, again, considering that we have on medium mobile almost 2 megs in general per page, and on the desktop, these things are important because you can see there's a media management issue taking place. So that's on the JPEG side. Let's talk about some video. Video is very important today. Now, if you look at this chart right here, again, taken from the HTTP Archive Web Almanac, which is a very interesting read. You should go check it out. You can see at the very base, P10, so at the 10th percentile, almost half of the content per page is either video or images. And if you take that to P75, you're at 80%, and P90, you're at 90%. So media is very important. I'm going to bring it back to my favorite quote from Quote McCandless. The foundation of the whole internet is data compression. So let's take a look at some video stats. Globally, this is a stat from about a year ago from Cisco, but we know these numbers are probably here with us today. Video traffic is going to go through the roof. For those, if there's some Americans here or some people that love American football, in 2015 or since 2015, cable's down, but streaming is up. And in fact, it was up 200%, taking us to 2.6 million a couple of years ago. In 2020, this year, 7.4 million people streamed at the Super Bowl. But if you think that was a huge number, cricket, way bigger. And in fact, Akamai, the CEO of Akamai, Tom Layton, talked about having a match being streamed by 25 million people concurrently, all on mobile. And we know India has got this market where it's moderate devices right down to low-powered ones. These are very big engineering feats to take on. So let's talk about the video landscape. H.264, one we're very familiar with, it's been around since 2003 as a codec. Pretty much, all around, you're getting a lot of that content. H.265 is the one I talked about, HEVC, again, very, very good codec, but weighed down by patent issues. And that's something that companies were willing to look at and trying to create maybe an open source format. And those VP8, VP9, and VP10, I'm going to talk about that in a hot minute. So where does all that bring us today? Well, we're going to talk about this thing called the AV1, a new format, open source format, patent-free format that's being developed. And it's spelled just like this. It's being done and produced by an Alliance for Open Media, a kind of a conglomerate of big companies, many of the FANGs, if not all the FANGs. And it looks like this. So the heavyweights, Amazon, Apple, Netflix, Google with YouTube, obviously, Facebook, Samsung, et cetera, Cisco. Why is this important? Because these are all content providers, content creators, and they're sending video. They're doing a lot of video content. So it's very important for them to have a very technically sound format and ideally a patent-free, royalty-free format as well. There are some other companies involved as well. You'll be able to take a look at that on your slides. But why is this important? Well, YouTube's a big believer, and they've had an immense need for this kind of technology. Why? 1 billion hours of YouTube watched per day, 500 hours uploaded per minute, and 70% of that is on mobile. Imagine that. Let's talk about Twitch. This number is so large I can't even say it. This is the hours of Twitch that were played in May, or streamed, should I say, because I know Twitch is a gaming platform. This is the amount of concurrent views. Again, engineering challenges, engineering feats to take in. And that was mostly desktop. So you have like the two extremes where you have desktop people, you have mobile people, and you have to accommodate both. And obviously, we're very familiar with the sort of like status quo today. Everyone's on Zoom. They're doing dates on Zoom now. But Google Hangouts, Google Meets, Google Duo, in fact, has announced recently that they're about to start using AV1. WebEx, GoToMeetings, Teams, FaceTime. These are all video platforms that are very important. So the AV1 codec is a very interesting one because it is the fusion, the amalgam of 3 codecs that were being worked on at the same time. Google's VP10, and in fact, it was actually a company that Google acquired, but VP10, Mozilla's DALA, and Cisco's Thor codec. And combined, they came out and created AV1. But with any new technologies, there's always going to be new issues. And one of the issues with AV1 is its complexity. Again, for everything that they need to do with video, and you're talking about also the idea that you want high efficiency and low complexity, and you have so many sort of like varying devices on the market, it has created a bit of a challenge. So let's talk about some of these challenges that we've seen. YouTube was having some experiments, in fact, and they were playing around with the AV1, kind of teasing it in and out with some content. And they realized that 10% of their clients out there were 12 years old or older. So 1 out of 10 of you are using phones that are 2008 or older. Like, what's that all about? Well, it's something that they have to take into consideration. Facebook also, with their own challenges. They've been testing the AV1, releasing content at 720p maximum, 5-minute videos. But again, their challenge, their mobile clientele, 80% no. I mean, these are legitimate issues that they have to take care of. So the AV1 landscape and the adoption timeline is looking a little like this. So you're going to have browsers who are supporting it right now, and we're going to talk about that in a hot second. You have hardware, content, commercial devices. These are things that are all going to happen in due time, but they're coming down the pipe. So as I mentioned right there, we have Firefox Nightly. You can go into the Experiments tab and turn on AV1. And actually, if you go to Chrome and YouTube specifically, you can see that you could actually play with the AV1 right away. Now, would you also believe that there's another format called AVIF, which is based on AV1, which is also part of potentially what the future will hold. So AV1 is going to be, AVIF is going to be, like I said, part of a AV1 file format. And as an image format is going to provide some of the key benefits that we love. So 8 to 12 bits, lossy, lossless, an alpha channel, chroma subsampling, 420, 422, 444, you'll be able to look that up, and HDR. Now, you're going to see as well that in some tests, the AVIF has been doing very well. And you'll be able to sort of dive into the details right there, but beats out WebP, beats out JPEG 2000, beats out Heath. And AV1 is being worked on and added to Chrome as we speak. So let's talk about the future. Well, believe it or not, WebP2 is being worked on. Believe it or not, AV2 is being worked on. Again, working on the little kinks that they're trying to figure out and improve. And we're also going to get, on the video side, you're going to get VVC, which is video versatile video coding and essential video coding, which is EVC. But one of those, the VVC, is going to be is going to have patents. So I'm not sure what's going to happen there. So in conclusion, great things are happening on the media side. Great things are happening, whether it be video or images. So you're going to see a bright future. But there's always one more thing. We've been talking about the future, let's talk about the present. And this is going to be my closing line. The WebP has been a format that's been around for 10 years and was adopted very early by people like Google because they actually bought the company that produced it. But for the last little while, we've had a lot of good support for the WebP, as you can tell right here. But would you believe that about 4 years ago, Safari was playing with the WebP, pulled it back out, but now they pulled it and put it back in. WebP is going to be supported by Safari in iOS 14, which should be out in the next few weeks, maybe a few months. And that's going to mean that you're going to have a nice green line right across the support for browsers for the WebP. That basically means that within about probably 2021, you'll be able to use the WebP literally almost exclusively. But with that being said, the future's bright for media, and thank you very much for listening.
Okay, thank you so much for that, Henry. Moving on, we're looking at smart interface design patterns. Our next speaker loves beautiful content, and they don't give up easily. He's born in Minsk, Belarus, and studied computer science and mathematics in Germany, whilst writing algebra proofs and preparing for software engineering at nights in the kitchen. At the same time, he discovered his passion for typography, interface design, and writing. After working as a freelance designer and developer for 6 years, he co-founded Smashing Magazine back in 2006, which is a leading online magazine for designers and developers. His curiosity drove him from interface design to front-end, performance optimization to accessibility and back to user experience over all the years. Vitali is the author, co-author and editor of all Smashing books and a curator of all Smashing conferences. He currently works as a creative lead at Smashing Magazine and front-end UX consultant in Europe and abroad, working with the likes of the European Parliament, Axel Springer and a few other companies. Let's give a warm welcome to Vitali Friedman.
Okay, I think we're live. So let me go full stream and full screen and go on. Now, hello everyone. Thank you so much for joining me. Thank you so much for having me at the Shift Remote conference. It's really a pleasure. Unfortunately, I can't be here with you today, and I'm looking at the screen hoping that anybody can hear me without any feedback. But still, it's a pleasure to kind of still try to be connected, and should be available in the chat during the session as well. Now, what I want to give you today is some sort of a really nice toolbox of things and ideas that are really important to me. Things that we kind of discovered over the last couple of years or so, which have to deal with things that we have to build every single day, and that's specifically navigation, right? We have to think about accordions and mega drop-downs and all kind of navigations, but there are certain things that are often done wrong, and there are certain things that can be done better. So my hope is that after 30 minutes, you have a pretty decent overview of those techniques that you can apply to your work right away. And it all starts with a really strange idea, I guess, first, or specifically the way that many managers perceive a creative process. So every time I'm working with companies, I end up with people seeing this creative process, and it doesn't matter if you're a designer or developer or anything in between, they see this creative process as being kind of an iterative process. Now that's not very surprising, right? Obviously, you will have to start somewhere, you'll have to finish somewhere, and between those lines there is essentially the path that you're taking, right? That's not very surprising, but it's very interesting to me that most of the time we perceive it as a very linear, continuous, iterative path, which it really isn't, if you ask me, because if I look at my work and the work of my colleagues, very often we're restricted by the boundaries. And don't get me wrong, I'm not just talking about, creatives who are kind of exploring all kind of ideas, anything of that kind. Doesn't matter if you're a designer, developer, or anything in between. Maybe you're a developer, maybe you're a designer, or whatever, right? You end up being in this place where you're bound by boundaries, right? You're restricted. Your choices are limited. It might be the matter of, the expertise that you have in house. Maybe it's the budget. Maybe it's the time, right? Maybe it's the people you're working with, and all those things kind of make these decisions much more restrictive. And it's very interesting because, again, if I look at my work, the creative process for any design decision, for any front-end decision, it doesn't matter what you're doing, will look somehow like this, right? Where we start somewhere and go, we explore. Maybe we explore different architectures, the different frameworks, or different design patterns, or anything of that kind. We're looking around to find what we need to do to move forward to that finish line, right? And eventually, of course, on that path, you will be hitting these deadlines or the dead ends, right? Where things are not just working really well. And so this is the point where you actually have to find your way out, reroute yourself, and find another solution, and then move forward from there. And that's a very expensive thing. That's a really expensive thing. If you don't know what to do, you have to figure out something now. You tend to do what? Well, you tend to rely on things that used to work in the past. So we end up with, this traditional view of design being thing that's just generic. Right? It doesn't matter, what you're designing today. It's probably going to fit well in either the left paradigm or the right paradigm because there is nothing else on the web. The only difference sometimes is the position of a carousel, which is sometimes on the left, sometimes on the right, sometimes on the top, sometimes at the bottom, and sometimes everywhere, because why not, right? And it's really interesting that this affects not only us as the web industry, but also the fashion industry. The only reason why many of the brands actually moved towards slightly more convenient and simple typeface is the reason that they just want to be neutral. They want to be everywhere. They want to be legible on small screens and large screens and everywhere in between, right? And this is a little bit difficult because when you move to this direction, you end up being indistinguishable from everybody else. Because if you do want to stand out today, it has become incredibly easy. You really just need to stand out a little, right? Or maybe a lot. It depends on how you take it, right? But I think it's very important when we look and explore design or front-end or anything really at this point, it's really important for us to think about how can we make the experience for customer really, really great without investing too much effort into it, right? Because we can go to extremes and do all kind of impossible features and stuff, but this is going to be expensive. So my goal has been, how do we make websites or web applications stand out a little bit more through the quality of their design, right? Because design is usually going to be a little bit less expensive compared to incredible backend and front-end effort. Now, this brings us to a couple of things that we discovered when we started running some tests. When it comes to navigation, there is a particular way of how we perceive navigation. And that's usually, it's a predictable thing. It's a horizontal bar, maybe a sidebar, and a hamburger icon with a menu, and that's it. And I would really challenge you to try something else for a while, or try something else for a change, right? Why? Well, because this can bring you an incredible amount of traffic and also incredible impact on your conversion, for example. Now, let's take a look at some examples. So if you look at this Institut Français de la Mode, right? I think that many of us would find this navigation slightly unusual, the layout slightly unusual, maybe typography slightly unusual, the marquee slightly unusual, many unusual things. Now, it was very surprising to me when I was writing the test that actually nobody had major issues with the navigation on the site. I mean, the layout, the grid on the front page might be a little bit difficult, but when it comes to navigation, people love the fact that all the buttons are clickable and large enough, and it's really easy to navigate there, right? And there is no problems because everything is big enough, right? And we actually like this idea of hiding navigation for some reason. I'm wondering why that is. Because if we look at Point Campus, for example, right, that would be a little bit, weird maybe. Why would you actually dedicate half of the screen to, navigation? Isn't it weird? Would you do that? That's a little bit off, isn't it? Well, but at the same time, we need to look into the speed. How fast are people actually interacting with the site? Do they find what they're looking for and all those things? And it's incredible. It's performed really, really well because you didn't have to go to navigation all the time. It was all there all the time. Well, because of mobile, of course, we changed the way we design navigation a lot. So we see a lot of bars at the bottom showing up, right? Where we see recently viewed items, search, featured items, and categories and everything showing up there. And it's actually a really good idea because very often I have a feeling that many websites that are heavily designed and optimized for mobile end up being totally unoptimized for desktop, right? And the other way around. So we always have these discussions going mobile first or desktop first, and I think we kind of need both. So if you want to optimize for mobile, you're probably going to do what Franz Hals Museum does, right? You want to have the hamburger icon or the navigation at the bottom where it's closer to the thumb, right? And you will be navigating from there up, right? Not bottom from top to bottom, but from bottom to up, right? And then this is where you could also place search and things like that. And very common in front end, you end up with the problem on mobile phones where you have to tap twice on the icon because of the iOS controller situation. So for example, so you have to click and then something shows up, like a bar shows up at the bottom, and then you have to click again. If you want to avoid that, you just need to push this entire bar by 10 to 15 pixels up, maybe add some drop shadow to it with a bit of z-index, and you will not have this problem. But this kind of pattern is much more convenient for the thumb, right? It's just way better for the fingers to operate it, right? Instead of hiding things in the bottom upper left corner or upper right corner, right? And of course, some applications are really making use of it. This is one of them. Ada is a medical application which allows you to talk to a chatbot and then figure out what your prescription medication is and also track your medical income, right? And so what happens there is, of course, the entire design is focused around this experience of a thumb and the index finger and how you're interacting with a chatbot. So it's not very surprising, of course, that the entire interaction is also happening bottom up. The logo is in the bottom left, the navigation is in the bottom right, the call to action is at the bottom as well, and the first half of the screen is just totally empty. And why would you put something in there? It's totally inaccessible anyway. And in fact, if we look into the area of which is what portion is more comfortable to tap and what is less comfortable to tap, obviously it kind of naturally fits in with the scope of how the properties of our hands, the physical properties of our hands. So this is the experience you get there. But it's actually a bit confusing at times because this kind of pattern, which is perfectly fine for mobile, becomes a little bit awkward on desktop. Right? So when you end up with this progress indicator, the steppers in the checkout where you can jump from one step to another, all the way at the bottom on desktop, this is where things are a little bit off maybe because it's just uncomfortable for desktop, right? Another thing that shows up quite a lot is that we tend to use hamburger icon a lot. And that's actually quite confusing as well because if you have a very important call to action, right? Like a login, a sign up or download the app at this point, why would you actually hide it? It should probably be front and center of your application, right? So instead of hiding it behind a hamburger icon, it might be a good idea to think about maybe placing them right here because there is space for it. Now, the reason why we don't do that most of the time is very simple because we can't show everything, like all the items, so we end up displaying nothing, although we could show something. I think that makes sense, right? So instead of actually saying, okay, we maybe cannot put all of them, but maybe there is a way to replace the download the app link with something like a blue button or anything of the kind, or orange button, but show important things at all times. There is no reason to hide important things. And I think it's really important to compare it to the basement. So if you have something very, very important that you will use frequently, you will not put it in the basement, unless you spend a lot of time in the basement, of course. You will put something that you think, maybe we'll use every now and again, but not all the time. And so it's actually really important to highlight and expose those things to customers so they are confronted with the stuff that you have to offer on your site, right? And so some sites do that really well. This is a really great example for me, like where everything is done just well. Ritual.com, they provide a couple of products and they have this call to action button on desktop. It's very prominent. It's noticeable. And as you start scrolling down and you're beyond a certain point on desktop, that call to action is still visible at all times, as it should be, right? Now, obviously, it's probably going to take quite a bit of space if you wanted to highlight this entire thing, this entire bar on mobile. So on mobile, the experience is slightly different. So if I jump a little bit to the mobile screen, so that button all of a sudden jumps to the bottom of the screen and it's persistent there as it should be, right? And as you scroll all the way to the up, it actually finds its own place in the design. And so if we scroll up, please, right, it just becomes the normal part of this experience, right? Which also is exactly how it should be, right? Another example, which is actually quite similar, is coming from Israel, greeninvoice.co.il, where you also have the same thing, right? You have this prominent button that's always available if you need to, right? And on mobile, it actually becomes just a part of a fixed bar at the bottom. And they also have a nice contrast switcher right here, which you can use as well, which I think is pretty cool, right? But of course, we need to have a conversation. So yes, if we go to mobile screen, we'll find out that this button is actually now appearing at the bottom. Well, it should be at least. At some point it will be, right? So it's hard to see, but you're gonna get the idea. Very convenient pattern, really proved to be working. So please go ahead and use it at all times. Nothing groundbreaking, but still useful. Still, we do need to think about this beautiful, beautiful beast of ours, the hamburger icon. Oh, actually, it's not really a hamburger icon. It's more like a family of hamburger icons. You can pick your own flavor. Would you like to have a hot dog, or maybe a veggie burger, or maybe a cake, or stairs, or fries, or anything on the kind? You have your choice. And for a long time, we had a conversation. Do people understand the word menu? Do people understand the word, the hamburger icon? Do we need to combine them with the word menu? You know, if you look around today, most of the time it's not going to be a problem. So if you look at Georgian website, they'll be using a hamburger icon. If you look at Indian websites, many of them will be using a hamburger icon. If you look at an Israeli website, for example, many of them will be using a hamburger icon as well. So it's not very surprising to use a hamburger icon today. However, the placement differs at times. Now we saw this button already, where you see the menu button or the menu area appearing at the bottom in the center. Sometimes it also appears just in the bottom bar, kind of scrolling going up from bottom to up. And sometimes you would split the navigation, where you would have some important things at the bottom available all the time, but some less important things will still be hidden in the right upper corner in the navigation bar, right? So it kind of heavily depends on what you want to achieve. Now the icon per se can differ as well. So here in Samart from Russia, they chose to use the eye as an indicator of the navigation, right? To see the navigation and not to see the navigation. On the Pasta website, on the Hebrew website on the right, they use this kind of compass thing to indicate, because it's more related to traveling, a magazine, and lifestyle. And then in the center, you find the Pasta website, where essentially they use Pasta restaurant website, where they use the pasta icon. In fact, you are not restricted to the choice of the icons. You can go ahead and paint a butterfly if you want to. That's perfectly fine, as long as it kind of fits in within your story. Because people expect an element somewhere on one of the edges of the screen to be clickable and lead to navigation. But whatever icon you choose, you need to be very careful about how you use it and how you design it. Because very often you end up with a very strange situation where you tap on an icon, something happens, and then you want to return or undo that action. Imagine a carousel or a light box, anything of that kind. You will see this quite a lot, of course. And I want to come back. And there is a kind of two kinds of websites. On the one side, you will have this option where you tap and you tap again and you close right away by tapping on the same spot. And here on TQ, you actually have to travel quite a distance in order to close that bar, right? Which is a little bit confusing and probably unnecessary. So every time you have a hamburger icon and somebody clicks on it, make sure that the option to close the navigation is available right there at all times as well, right? And this goes for many different cases. For example, there are just a few examples. So here we have take a paper, you click again, and then you can close it. Just reserve the space for that hamburger icon to appear. And it doesn't have to be boring. So if you look into maybe adding some animation, maybe you want to combine it with tabs, just make sure again that when you tap, it changes, right? And the same goes for things like filters, right? Here on the top right in Harbor Space, you open the bar for filters and then they show up, right? Lightbox is actually a very similar idea. Because every time we create this distance between one action and the next action, we slow people down. And especially on mobile, where focusing on being precise is very difficult, it takes too much mental effort. So here, what I really like is you tap anywhere to increase the size of the image, and you click anywhere on the image to close it again. There is a minimal distance, literally 0, from initial action and the next action, right? Which I think is really cool as well. Now, I also think that it's probably a good time to think twice about using or not using a hamburger icon in the first place. Because if you look at some examples, you'll find that many can profit in terms of traffic and in terms of conversion by actually not having hamburger icon at all. MoMA saw an increase in ticket sales by just reducing or removing the hamburger icon and showing all items right there. Arbiter had more traffic in news website just by actually showing the navigation right there. And then on typography.com, they just show a site, just a regular navigation bar, because there are not that many navigation items, right? I mean, you cannot always pull it off, but there are some options. On Masterclass, for example, masterclass.com, they actually ended up using search, because I know that probably many people will be using search as the main navigation area. So there is no hamburger icon anywhere. In order to navigate, you either browse, so you're kind of exposed to the things that they have, or you click on search, and only then the navigation shows up, right? Which is kind of integrated with search. And then on cns.com, you have this floating bar, which always shows the main 3 sections, along with search, right? And which kind of overlays. They're always available, and there is nothing wrong about that at all. And on Scrouts, which is an e-commerce retail site, instead of having this huge, humongous mega drop-down that you will always find on e-commerce sites, they actually show all the navigation right there. So why not? I'm not saying that it's always better, because of course it heavily depends on the site you have and the app you have and the amount of navigation you have. But maybe it's a good idea to think about it as an option, right? Not everything needs to be a hamburger icon, right? And you might be wondering, so what's a big deal? Well, the big deal is that you really have to do some research and figure out what works and what doesn't, right? This is a very nice example from Luke Wroblewski. And Luke Wroblewski gave this really incredible talk a while back. And he was actually studying exactly this pattern. When do we show things? When do we hide things? And it kind of has to deal with the fact that we often get lost in A/B tests, which he calls low contrast tests. While we should be looking more closely at high contrast tests, which are more like AZ testing. Now, what's the difference? The difference is with A/B tests or low contrast tests, you just test a few minor things, like let's change the color of the button, the shape of the button, text on the button, and see what happens. And with high contrast tests, you actually test very different things, like literally very different features, very different flows, things that are remarkably different. And as developers or designers or managers, we kind of need a combination of both. And this is very, very important. Now, it's very interesting because when we look into testing that we usually run, you'll find out that most of the time it's let's change the position of a newsletter box, or let's change the position of a pop-up, or install app prompt, anything of that kind. But I would highly encourage you to test very different things. For example, this is a traditional, a classic e-commerce site. There is nothing groundbreaking about it, but this is probably what everybody has seen at some point in their life, right? So this is freepeople.com, and on Free People, the first thing you see is an app install banner on the top and a newsletter promo coming up second, right? That's an e-commerce website these days. Now, when we see it, most of us will probably not want to sign up and will not want to install the app. It's the first time we see the site and we want to establish a relationship. And in fact, maybe I'm wrong, but I really want to be friends with websites. I want to trust them. And it's really, really hard if they're pushing their agenda on the moment I actually come to the site, right? And I've been pushing this for quite a long time, which is why people are really suspicious about any kind of e-commerce experience these days. And they're always looking for hidden fees and hidden costs and anything of that kind. And we always end up in this cycle, right? Where we say, okay, we need to increase the number of people signing up for the newsletter or signing up for the app, right? So let's push. But then what we are forgetting at times is that there is an adverse effect as well. Because while you might increase, let's say, the conversion here, you might end up with more people complaining in support. You might end up with marketing and sale costs increasing massively. Why? Well, mostly because all of a sudden they realize that they have to invest more money and spend more money in advertising to acquire new customers because they don't like this experience, right? And so you end up in this kind of cycle where you need to spend more in order to get more, and you push more as a result on the site, which becomes a really, really horrible experience. So if you have this kind of situation where you are struggling maybe to make a case or make a point, I always ask for a little bit of time on Saturday, maybe 3 to 4 hours, to run a few tests with a different version. And that different version doesn't have to be a highly different version. It can also be a little bit different. Because what do people come for when they come to freepeople.com? Well, they come for content. So let's show them some content maybe. Because if you close the first newsletter box, and then if you close the app install banner, you actually get to see the content. That's pretty good. That's pretty useful, right? And it has an icon-based navigation and the feature and the category links. Okay, well, from our studies, we know that it's maybe a good idea to expose navigation, right? Right now we're using a hamburger icon in the left upper corner. So what if we change that? So what if instead of a hamburger icon in the left upper corner, we expose some of the important navigation parts right there, right? Because there are studies saying that, on growthrock.co, they saw an increase in 5% in completed orders just by doing that. They also tried in a different vertical, and they had a 29% increase in completed orders by, again, showing some navigation. On Edgar's, they saw 13% increase in revenue per visitor, and from 11% increase in mobile conversion rate just by showing navigation, replacing a newsletter box or any kind of promo box with navigation, right? Which is fashion, beauty, homeware, financial services. Okay, so maybe it would be a good idea to think about how we can adjust it. We have navigation at the bottom. Maybe we could actually do something around it, and maybe we could put it up or so. Maybe something like this could work, right? Where instead of showing this navigation at the bottom, we show it on the top, and maybe then once we are there, we can also show more items, right? So it's a bit more interesting and exciting. Maybe also we can reverse it, so it's a little bit more, focused on the products and the images, and that's slightly different already. But then, of course, we also know that in the previous design, well, we had the icon on the right upper corner for search, right? Well, we know from our studies that actually you should not be expecting more traffic coming to things that are hidden. So if you hide something behind an icon, it doesn't matter what icon it is, you should not be expecting more traffic coming there. So if you want more searches, you probably need to show a search bar. Why? Well, because there are studies saying that. Right? So in Matalan, they had 32% increase on searches on mobile just by showing a search box. In our test, actually, we did the same thing where we actually displayed the search bar at all times, and we saw an increase of 60% in searches both on mobile and on desktop. That's quite significant. So maybe then, while we're again optimizing the site, well, let's just show the search bar, right? Let's just show it right there. That's probably going to increase the search, people using the search. And of course, every now and again, you will have some situations where you have to do something or say something or add something because it's important. Like, for example, free shipping. We don't advertise free shipping here anywhere, and that's very, very important. But I would argue that today, good design decisions are not as much about placing and finding good layout and arrangement of things, but more about the proper timing. So when will be the proper timing to indicate that we have free shipping? When would be the proper timing to show a newsletter box? When would be the proper timing to ask for a correct email address? All these things have to be asked, right? So maybe when it comes to free shipping, it would be a good idea to display it on a product page, because eventually the hope is that customers will go there, and so we can indicate it right there. Or maybe, of course, if we have to, we put it in a tab in the bar. And this is not just a matter of changing a shape of a button or so, but it's actually a bit more critical than that, right? So I would highly encourage you to just go ahead and test it. On the other hand, sometimes we have just complicated navigation. So if you look at the Royal Institution, right, we have a lot of stuff going on, the traditional, good old school mega dropdown. And in that mega dropdown, how would you translate it to the mobile space? Well, what happens here is we have a menu button. That's not very surprising. And then when you click on the menu button, you end up with this view, and then you slide left and right. And there are some icon issues over here as well, but in general, when you think about this experience, very often you will find out that it can be actually quite slow for people to navigate between levels, because you will see probably one, maybe at most two levels at a time, right? So instead, maybe let's try to do something a little bit better. So here are a few examples of that in action, right? Let me just maybe jump over here, right here, right? On Decathlon, where you have the menu as well, right, and you have the search and you have the shopping cart, and also use the area at the bottom to indicate some of the important things for them, like again, free shipping and other things. When you click on the menu, you actually have a very nice overview of all the features you have with some keywords and things, but you at least see a little bit of contrast between the previous section and the next section, right? Okay, that's fine. If you need to do this, you can do that, right? However, what if we tried to do it, vertically? So here's an example of that in Action or RWE, where you have essentially just a set of accordions and expanders, and you use a bit of indentation to indicate the different sections, right? That's, you might say, this is not very focused, but it's really easy and fast to navigate between different levels, right? And of course, maybe it could use a bit more contrast. So for me, a really good example of it is Allianz. Because on Allianz, you see 3 levels, they're clearly differentiated, right? And you know exactly where you are at a given time, right? And even if you have a lot of items, maybe actually a vertical arrangement or sliding in and out would be a bit better than the horizontal one. I would at least try it. It performed a bit better in tests. And another thing you can do is to try to play with space. So maybe there is a way to avoid sliding both horizontal and vertical and split the screen space if the titles are not too lengthy, like it's done on lcfc.com, right? Where on the third screen here, essentially we're splitting the entire screen into 2 parts and showing the first section. Oops, it's really hard for me to navigate here. The first section and the second section inside, right? That's pretty reasonable. So maybe we can play a little bit with the space as well. I mean, it's 2020, and we still see a lot of things which are just a little bit weird. One of them is when the mega drop-downs appear on hover. That's just really frustrating. So why not display it always on tap or on click, right? So this is what's happening in the Jewish Museum in Berlin, right? Where the menu area, the menu bar, doesn't disappear unless you close it, right? It might be a good idea maybe to indicate some sort of an accordion that you can close it, but essentially most parts of this experience are literally just that, right? Where you open on click or on tap, and you do not open on hover. Again, a very similar corporate example of that is Allianz, where you essentially literally do the same thing, exactly the same thing, where both search and all the navigation options actually open exactly when you want them to be opened, right? And just the final 3 things I want to show here as an indicator of what we can do with navigation. And that's literally the fact that we can just ask customers to construct their own query and tell us what they want. So what are they here for? So this is essentially like a drop-down or a bunch of drop-downs. You select one of the options, and then based on your selection, instead of showing you 3 or 4 levels deep navigation, they just ask you, what do you want? Right? And then you specify your input. That's maybe a little bit more convenient and conversational. That's another example of similar pattern on corkchamber.ie, where you see this little I want to pattern all the way on the top, where you select in a drop down. It could be a little bit bigger, maybe a little bit nicer, but in general it's still kind of the same idea, where on the top you're selecting what you would like to do. Take a training course, book an event, and it's much more actionable and it's much more relatable to what the customer actually wants to achieve, right? So in that regard, it's actually a really good idea to have it, maybe, or just to think about it. And the final thing I want to show you is essentially what we decided to do when we approached this navigation issue. And so when we end up with our navigation, we know that some things are more important than others, so we need to really look into priorities and expose important things that should always be visible. And so we said that maybe we could say like, okay, maybe we should keep these 2 because they're important for the users. We should probably keep this because it's important for the business, and these ones could be hidden one by one, kind of showing up in this kind of navigation bar later, right? Then you have a hover state and all the regular things, right? And so this was kind of one of the main goals, to keep the priorities intact. And so we started playing with different patterns, and this is one of the patterns that we ended up with, and we're still working on it, of course, kind of displaying search at all times. And over time, search now, if you go on smashingmagazine.com, will be even bigger. And of course, instead of using a hamburger icon, we're using a cat icon because, we're cat friendly and we have a smashing cat. And you can even be a bit playful with this because, the moment when somebody actually opened the bar, they opened the menu, you can just put a close button menu next to it. But I'm very proud that we decided to do this, where the cat is trying to chase the X, which I think is pretty fun, right? So, but the important thing is the consideration we took is really, let's think about priorities and focus on them. Now, I also like checklists, so I prepared a huge navigation design checklist with all the things I think about when it comes to navigation. So this is the stuff that I always take with me to designers and developers and meetings, and then we just talk everything one by one to figure out what is it that we do, what is it that we don't do, right? So to sum up, first, define priorities for your navigation. Never hide critical items. Consider splitting navigation vertically for submenus. Think about it. Maybe you don't need more than 2 levels of navigation in the first place, right? Maybe you need 3, but probably not 4. Maybe replace it with a really good autocomplete search instead. We see that important navigation is going to probably go to the bottom, appearing as bottom tabs. You can also turn breadcrumbs into floating buttons, like we saw with some of the calls to actions on the top, right? Display as much navigation as you can, because if there are important items, you will want to drive traffic to them, so display them. And then maybe collapse it when it makes sense. So when you scroll down, all of a sudden navigation disappears, and then as you scroll up, the navigation appears again. Not very groundbreaking, but I hope that some of those things were kind of useful for you, and you'll be able to apply to your work right away. One thing to think about, next time somebody asks you about the hamburger icon, at least try to check and see if you really need it. Chances are high that you'll be better off without it. With this in mind, thanks for your attention. I hope that this was useful, and looking forward to your questions later.
Thank you so much for that, Vitali. And let's carry on with our conference. We have a short speech coming up next for you. So please do stay engaged for this one. We'd love to see your comments in the chat. Keep using that function there. Our next speaker has 7+ years of experience in front-end development, specializing in JavaScript and UX. He's passionate about tooling, web performance, and Vue.js. Let's welcome Marko Boskovic.
Hi everybody, my name is Marko, and today I'm going to be talking to you about reactivity in Vue 3. First of all, a little bit about myself. My name is Marko, as I already mentioned. I'm a senior front-end developer at Barrage, and my main focus is user experience and web performance. So let's jump into our team. What is reactivity? By this definition, it seems like a really complicated thing, but actually it's really simple, and we can see it by that in next example. So in this example, we have 2 variables that we want to get a sum of those 2 variables. When we first call the total variable, which is actually the sum of the previous 2 variables, we get in this case 9. But if we change one of our variables, total will not change. That's the problem in JavaScript, because it's sequential and how it actually works. So how can we solve that? We need to reassign again what we want to achieve, and that's to get the sum of current state of first variable and state of the second variable, and then we get a total of which is 12. But that's a problem, and it seems like a really repetitive work. So how can we fix that? We can fix that none other than using the famous spreadsheets. Spreadsheets are the simplest form of reactivity that we know, and let's see by the following example. So if we have, for example, in 2 columns, 2 different variables, and the last column, the C column, is reflecting those variables by giving the sum of those 2 variables. Every time we change any of the variables, some will change accordingly. So this is what we need to achieve in our JavaScript. So how can we achieve that? We can achieve that by doing the following attributes. So first we need to track changes of the variables that we are going to change. When we track them, we need to trigger all the dependencies that changes to that value. So we need to check the function that changes those variables. And then when we change it, we need to trigger all those functions so we can update the final value. This is the rough idea of how reactivity in Vue works. You can check it out on the docs. And there is more in-depth guide how it works, so you can check it there. But let's see with our example. So data in here we have a data, and we have two variables that we're gonna sum. We are getting the real value of those variables from the object, and we are tracking all dependencies in these arrays. So when we, for example, when we change the variable, we need to add that dependency in those arrays. So we have a trigger track function, and we then have a trigger method. With the track method, we're gonna put all dependencies inside of the object, and when we change the value, we're gonna do the trigger. We're gonna do that in Vue tree's object-defined property. So when we call the variable that we need to track, we will call the getter in object-defined property. After that, we need to put the changes in that array that we set, and then when we change the value, we need to trigger those methods in those array. We do also for the second. After that, we also for the second variable. Sorry. Also, we need to watch the function. We need to have a watch function that watches our changes. After that, we define three functions that depend on and does only the logging for this case. And after that, we'll run all that dependencies. When we change any of the values, the sum will change accordingly. So, how there is some problems with this. In Vue 2, we have a object-defined property which is really limited because we cannot track when value is changing. For example, if our value is array, if we change we want to assign the new values as over the index, that's not possible because we will lose reactivity. Also, if we adding new property to an object, we also lose reactivity. So we need a complementary API that Vue gives us with the Vue.$set. So when we have a new value, we can push it with that method. In Vue 3, we have a better solution for this, and that's the proxies. How we're going to do that? It's by doing following. So we have also the same as in previous example, a variable x and y. Dependency we are pushing in a new map type field, a variable, because it gives us better support of tracking dependencies if the type of the dependency is object. Then we have a track method that we're gonna push all dependencies on that map. Also, then we have a trigger method that we're gonna trigger each dependency function in those maps. So after that, we define, instead of object-defined property, we use a new proxy. New proxy is a ECMAScript 6 API that gives us similar that gives us a similar use case as an object-defined property, but it gives us more because we get the reflect in that, and reflect is an API that has inside of their method it has a better binding to this context because Vue uses this in their components, and it's much easier to handle those problems that we have in Vue 2. So we have a new proxy After that, we we track also, like same in the previous version, in 2 version. We also track dependencies, push them in the map, then return the real value using reflect. When we set the property, we also set the value and then trigger the update of the nested dependencies that we need. After that, we define watch functions that we're going to watch, define watch function that's going to trigger those functions that we defined. After we called those watch functions, we will get the first output with the correct sum, and if we change dependencies, the x or y variable, then we get a proper result. So, conclusion, Xmatrix proxy are a great solution for reactivity because it gets rid of those caveats in Vue.2 without when we are using objects and arrays by referring with the object index, and it gives us reactivity where we lose it in Vue.2. Reflect helps us with better binding to this, so we don't need more relying on object-defined property. The issue is that proxies are only supported in Xmatrix 6, which is not supported in Vue in IE11, sorry. And so if we need support for IE11, there will be a legacy build that will also give us object-defined property in this case. So we are still having those issues that we need to work around. Also in Vue 3, reactivity is abstracted from the component instance. So when you, for example, when you need the reactivity, you can just use reactivity and apply it in your other applications that doesn't have to do anything with Vue, or even in the backend if you really want. There I will leave these useful links. So please check the second link. It's really good. It's in-depth talk about what is upcoming in Vue 3. That's all from me. Thank you for having me, and bye.
Okay, we have one more speech for you before we go to our first break, so please stick in there with us. Before we do that, let's play a quick game. The only way we can play games virtually is if I ask you a question and you just do what I ask you to do. Why don't we, wherever we are in the world, just put the flag of that country up for us in that chat section so we can see where we are across the world? That'd be really great. I'm in the UK, for those that couldn't tell by my accent. I'm definitely not Croatian. I would love to be, though. Our next speaker is a Jamstack developer and technical writer who currently works in developer relations at Hashnode. He's passionate about sharing knowledge, documentation, web engineering, Jamstack communities, and sustaining FOSS, F-O-S-S. Let's welcome Balaji Ayodeji.
Hello everyone, thank you so much for joining me today on my talk. I would be talking about optimizing content management with the Headless CMS. My name is Balaji Ayodeji. I'm sure we would have all loved to meet physically today, but due to the current pandemic, we have to stay safe for ourselves and for others. So thank you for staying safe and joining remotely. If you're watching me live now, you can just scan this QR code and get a link to the slides, and then we can all roll together. My name is Balaji Ayodeji, and I'm a developer advocate at Hashnode. Hashnode is a hassle-free content creation platform that allows developers to create blogs and team publications without sacrificing visibility, reach, SEO, and independence. I'm also a Jamstack developer and technical writer, and I so much love documentation and web engineering. For as long as humans have been creating content, we've been searching for solutions to manage it. When we think about content, we always, or most often, you would think of it as a digital content. But as far as back of 300 BC, we've been managing content. So in the Library of Alexandria, librarians were managing contents using items like scrolls, codex, and some other ancient materials. And this is how content was managed. So Content management didn't start when the World Wide Web came in the 90s, but it simply increased. So today I'll be talking about optimizing content management with the Headless CMS, and I'll take you through several content management systems and all you need to know about the Headless CMS. Let's get started. So content is information that some editorial processes are being performed on, and this content is meant to be consumed by the final users. So content is meant to be created, it's meant to be managed, it's meant to be optimized, and then it's now finally compiled and then sent to the end users. Since we have content, there is a need for us to manage this content. And content management is a set of processes and technologies that help you to manage the content. So it works through the process of collecting the content, the process of managing the content, updating already existing content, deleting content, performing some editorial processes on this content, and then finally delivering this content to any form or medium which you might need it. Now, we have four big parts of the content management. We have the web content management, which is basically large-scale contents that are meant to be delivered via a website. Enterprise content management are also large-scale contents, but they are most likely not meant to be delivered via websites, possibly employee records, resumes, and tons of other kind of records. Digital asset management, on the other hand, is basically all kind of media assets, text files, audio files, video files, and etc. Record management are all documents that can come from business operations, either finance records or, sales records. Now, we have content, we need to manage content. How do we manage content? This brings us to content management systems. So a content management system, also shortened to CMS, is basically a tool that allows you to manage content. It allows you to perform all the editorial process, ranging from creating content, managing content, updating existing content, and every other process before this content is being processed and then sent to the end users. Content management system provide a collaborative environment where multiple users can work on the same content. They can perform all the editorial process I mentioned earlier on one content, and then this content is then compiled to the final user. But then there is two processes in content management. The first one is a content management application, also known as CMA, and the content delivery application, also known as CDA. So basically, the CMA is a graphical user interface where your content is being managed. And the CDA is a content delivery network where the content is being processed and compiled down to the user. So this is a small chart that illustrates how content management systems work. The screen here is a content management application. This is a graphical user interface. This is where you write your content. This is where you edit your content. This is where you delete content. And then these lines show the distribution process of how this content is being sent down to different devices or platforms. This is how content management systems work. Now, I mentioned earlier we've been managing contents even right before the 90s, and these contents were managed using physical items like scrolls and codices. But traditionally, we'll be managing contents using a process whereby the CMA and the CDA are tightly coupled together. The content management application, which is the graphical user interface, is tightly coupled with the content delivery application. So now, the content is being stored in the content repository, either your database, and then there's a server that fetches that content of the database into the content management application, which is most likely your admin dashboard. And then content is being managed in the admin dashboard, and then it's being sent down to the content to the end users via the content delivery application. Now, the application where your content is the application that uses the contents is running on the same server where your content is managed. So see it as this simple chart. You have your backend user interface, which is most likely your admin dashboard. You have some code plugins, you have some front-end templates. All of them work in one server and one database. And your final endpoints of this application is also still running on the same server. So imagine this kind of setup where your front-end is built with something like, let's say, React.js, and then your backend is running on something like Node.js. Both applications are using one server, and your content management application is also running on the same server. So this simply means your content management system is coupled together. The CME and the CDA come together in one single application. So if you look at this process now, it's traditional. And most of us, most applications today might not even have this traditional setup. You most likely have your content in a database, right? And then most often these contents are usually maybe inventories like e-commerce product. Or most often when we think about contents, it's way beyond just inventories. We have other kind of contents. It's not just about blog posts or maybe news feeds or a couple of other kind of contents. Now, on the traditional way of managing this content, you have your database where this content is being stored, and then you fetch the content directly from your database into your application. So, now, if you look at the traditional content management system process, as someone who has worked with content for almost 2 years and also as a front-end developer, I can tell you some of the issues you face when it comes to managing content and managing the user interface. So content managers most often write this content in a document, right? And then as a front-end developer, you get these contents from them, and then you literally have to copy and paste this content wherever you need them. Now, if you try to study how this works, if you have an application that uses one content in several pages or several aspects, you obviously have to copy and paste the same content in different aspects of your application. Or thanks to GraphQL, you can easily query the same content stored in one file, maybe a JSON file in your code base, and then reuse it on several platforms. But remember, your content is still stored on your local server. Now, we're in a modern world today where several platforms have been innovated, ranging from smartwatches, VR headsets, IoT devices, our fridges, digital banners, and so many other platforms who actually require the same content. So if you're still working with the traditional method of managing content, then you literally have to still copy and paste the same content on each and every platform you use it. Before now, the problem was just reusing content in one application. But now we have several methods and platforms, devices that require the same content. So you literally have to go and copy and paste the same content everywhere, right? This brings us down to the headless content management system. A headless CMS is a backend only content management system built from the ground up as a content repository that makes raw structured content accessible via APIs or the Git workflow for display on any platform or device. Now, an headless CMS cuts off the head. We see the head here now as a front-end layer. Remember, you have your CMA and your CDA, and also you have your servers. So the content management application works alongside a backend server, and then that is just all about content management. The front end works on its own, and it also has its own server, and that is all about the front end. So your front end communicates with your content management via APIs or the Git workflow. And it makes it easier for you to manage this content and use this content on several other platforms because these contents are not stored on one server that runs the application itself. The content is independent from the application itself. And if you look at this, the headless lacks content presentation functionality or the front-end display. So when it comes to the headless CMS, you would need additional technologies to serve the head. Now, let's look at headless CMS in this way. Remember, from traditional content management system, you have your backend server that passes through a backend UI known as a content management application. And then you perform all manner of editorial process on your content there. And then your CDA renders the application, the content on your web application. Hopefully it's a web application, right? Now with the headless CMS, there is also a backend and there's also a backend UI. The backend UI is the headless CMS, and that is where you run all your editorial process. But this time around, the CDA doesn't send the content directly to the web application where it's needed, but rather it prepares the content and makes it structured and waits for when it will be requested for. So now your front-end application has its own layer and has its own server. And then you request for content when you need it, and it comes fast because the content is structured and it's coming from the cloud. Now imagine you want to reuse the same content on the mobile application, on the VR set, on a smartwatch, or even in the same application but in different locations. You can easily request for data via an API, and it returns your content in form of JSON or XML formats, and then you can easily fetch this data, maybe using fetch or yours and then query this data into your application. This way you can easily reuse this content on several other platforms. And then there is no friction between the content managers and the front-end developers. So the content is created and edited in the backend, and the front end takes advantage of flexible and fast web services and APIs to deliver the raw content to the front end designer on any device or channel. So there is no friction between where the content is going to be delivered. There is no friction on how the content is going to be delivered. It becomes a very an independent process whereby you only worry about content on one end and worry about displaying content on another end. Now, this content can be accessed via flexible web APIs, like I mentioned, which can either be in REST or GraphQL. This is an example of a GraphQL, graph content management system, where you can fetch data from your content management system, which is headless, and then you have all your data here, and then you can query those data into your application. You can see from this left column, we are querying data from our Headless CMS, and you can see the data here in the middle of this Explorer. And right at the right-hand side, you can see how we are going to use this data in our code. And we can easily fetch all kind of data, all kind of content, ranging from text, audio, or video down to application. And we can perform the same process on different other applications. And let's take an example of how this is going to look in our code. Now we can easily render this content to fetch from our data into application. You might be familiar with this. This is how you work with your normal traditional CMS. But remember, the content was usually stored in your local server. And then you fetch your contents and then you render them on your application. But now your content is coming from a cloud service, and you can perform the same process on different technologies. So now you're not bottled down to one way of implementing your content. You're not worried about how React wants you to consume content. You're not worried about how Vue wants you to consume content. You're worried about just how to consume content. Content is available for you. You just have to consume it in whatever kind of stack or framework you're using. Now, one way of the content delivering application, one way it works is through the API and web services method. Another workflow is the Git-based workflow, whereby your content doesn't pass through an application programming interface, but rather passes through the Git workflow. If you're familiar with how Git works, you make a push commit to a Git repository, and then some changes are made to your repository and all that Git process that works behind the scene. So with a Git-based content management system, you have your content stored in a Git provider, either GitHub or GitLab. And then you can make a push commit to edit the content, to delete the content, to modify content, to perform any action on your content. And each time a new commit is made, it triggers a new build for your site, and an update is made on the website or wherever your content is being utilized. So you can see here now for the API-based Headless CMS, the content delivery application uses API and fast web services to deliver the content down to wherever it is needed. Or the Git-based Headless CMS, it uses the Git workflow and then allows it to deliver content down to you wherever it's needed immediately. So the Git-based Headless CMS allows you to update and manage this content right in your GitHub application or even on dashboard. You can do all manner of sorting, arranging, and structuring this content however you might need it. If you look at this sample, we have posts, we have FAQs, we have settings, we have kitchen sinks, several kind of information that will be needed in the application. And then you can manage several states of this application. You know which one is in drafts, which one is published, and this allows a very fast workflow of working with contents and the front-end team. Now, why do you need a Headless CMS? One, omnichannel experiences. Like I mentioned earlier, the modern web is fast improving, and then we have several platforms that require several contents. And this calls for a need for us to improve how we manage content, because you shouldn't be copying and pasting the same content you use on your website, in your mobile app, even down to your smartwatches, down to any other platform that requires your product. Headless CMS allow you to reuse your content on different platforms with the speed and flexibility of the Jamstack. Team flexibility. Like I mentioned earlier, there's going to be a friction between the front-end team and the content managers, where the content managers usually have to always ping up the front-end engineers and give them links to documents, and then the front-end engineers have to go to those documents, copy and paste onto their code, and if there's a change, they also have to go back, and there's just that back and forth between content and UI. But now with the Headless CMS, there is independence and less friction between both teams. The content managers work on the content, perform all the editorial process in the content management system, and then the front-end team only have to worry about layering that content. So as a content manager, I don't have to worry about how this content is going to be used. I'm only worrying about the content itself and how I'm going to structure it. As a front-end engineer, I'm not going to worry about what kind of content is this. I only have to worry about how do I layer this content. Another benefit you can get from the headless CMS is the front-end flexibility it comes with. Now remember, with the traditional content management system, the database, the backend, the website, the CMA runs on one server. So there is already pre-built setup of how everything should work. You cannot use the CMA is built using one particular server stack, and then that content is being used on one other front-end layer. So I can't reuse that content on another stack because they are all tightly coupled together. But with the headless CMS, there is flexibility. You can build your CMS on any kind of server or any kind of backend stack, and I can reuse the same content on any kind of framework or any kind of front-end layer, even down to native HTML and CSS websites. I can consume the APIs and then have my content rendered on any kind of front-end layer I want. This is flexible. One good benefit of the headless CMS also is the structured data. Remember, from the traditional content management system process, data is usually stored in databases. For a content manager, if I don't have so much technical strength or expertise, I would not really understand how to fetch data from the database. I know some traditional content management systems provide you with some admin dashboard where you can manage this data and then send post requests down to the database. But with the headless CMS, you have structured data in one content repository, and it becomes much easier to work with content and much more easier for front-end engineers to consume content. Now, security and scalability. Remember, headless CMS is coming from the cloud, and most often this is known as cloud as a service. I will explain more about this in the next slide. Now, there is only one point of vulnerability of your content, which is the endpoint. And the cloud service provider has expertise in ensuring that your endpoint is secured using some DDoS migrating strategies or some authentication tokens, whereby you don't have to worry about security breaches with your content. Because why? You're using the content provider whose job is to ensure that your endpoint is secured, rather than relying on local infrastructure to manage and secure your content. Simple workflow. Remember, with traditional headless CMS, there is a very frictional process between how content is managed and how it's being sent down to the front-end layer. But with the headless CMS, there's a much more simpler workflow. You know which contents are in drafts, which ones are published, and you can easily manage states between these contents. Now, development speed. When your content is coming from the cloud and relying on CDN and some other modern web services processes, it's become much more faster than the traditional CMS process. Because now you're relying on the Jamstack architecture, which first aim is better performance. So you should be rest assured that your content will be delivered with fast speed down to your front-end layer. And yes, the content repository, you have all your content in one big repository, all kind of media files, all kind of text files, and then you can easily sort them out and structure them in however you want them to be structured. Now let's talk about the categories of headless CMS. I pretty much mentioned most of them before now. And we have the API-driven headless CMS, which just basically means when you make changes to your CMS and you deliver the contents to your front-end layer, you do this using APIs, which return data in either JSON or XML formats. This is how the CDE of the API-driven headless CMS work. Remember, the CDE is a content delivery application. The Git-based headless CMS basically work when you make changes to your Git repository using the Git workflow. And then each time a new change is made, which is the commit, GitHub triggers a new build for your website and updates the contents. Some example of the Git-based content management systems in Netlify CMS, Publi, Forestry, ExoAdmin, JQAdmin, and tons of others. For the API-driven, you have Strapi, Contentful, Graph CMS, Cosmic, Sanity. Each of these content management systems provides you with different features, different capabilities, and tons of flexibility to work on different kind of projects. So if your project is an enterprise scale, let's say application where you have several contents being utilized in several platforms, I see no reason why you should not work with a headless CMS. And if you have a small scale application also, and your contents would be updated frequently, you also should jump onto the headless CMS. But let's say your content and your application doesn't require so much updating, or you don't have so much technical expertise to set up a headless CMS, you might not worry so much about it. But remember, the modern web is improving, and each time it improves and we have new platforms, and more of them are still coming up that require your content, you need to increase and improve how you manage your content. You can check out www.headlesscms.org to check out all forms of headless CMS we have in the world today, ranging from open source projects to closed source projects and what features they have for you. Now, content as a service is a term usually used to explain how content is managed in cloud service computing. So basically, this just means your content is being managed by a service provider who then relays this content down to your end users when a request is made based on some set of cloud service license subscription. Just how cloud computing works generally. Your content repository is stored in the cloud, and then whenever you request for your content, the cloud service provider returns them down to your front end, which is the front end layer, and then down to your end users. This is a term also known as MCAS, which is Managed Cloud as a Service, or also known as Content as a Service. So whenever you see this, just see it as a new way of managing content with the cloud. Now, over time, the trends of headless CMS has grown from when it began. We can see from Google Trends since 2015 down to 2020, there's been a massive interest in the headless CMS. And this is because each year we keep improving in how we keep improving with the platforms. We keep having new devices, new methods of how that content to be utilized, and there's a need for us to grow. We can see from just last year down to this year, there's also some increase in the interest in headless CMS. So if you're front end, if you're a front end developer and you're still working with a team whereby you're using the traditional content management system, you might want to suggest to your team lead on how you should move to the headless CMS. This will reduce friction between you and the content managers, and also ensure that your product or your platform becomes much more faster and much more flexible. So today's modern content management system revolution is driving up demand for more flexible, scalable, customizable systems that deliver the experience you want and your customers expect. So as much as your customers were requiring just content on one platform in, let's say, 5 years ago, in 2020 now, you have your customers requesting for content in several platforms, on IoT devices, on smartwatches, on mobile applications. And you have to be sure you can render the same application to them on different platforms. The future is headless. And trust me, the process might be technical. It might be maybe quite hectic at the start process, but it's a sustainable process for managing your content. So if you don't have enough technical resources or expertise, then that means you might not need a headless CMS. But if your development process is quite technical and then you are managing so much content that requires some editorial processes and updating, you should consider moving to the headless CMS process. Thank you so much for listening to this talk. If you want to try the headless CMS, there are tons of resources on the internet today. You can just Google out headless CMS for your preferred stack, either React or Vue.js, and then you can find tons of resources on how you can manage content. Feel free to reach out to me on Twitter at IamBolaji.io and check out my post on Hashnode at Bolaji. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you, Bolaji. And with that, it's time for our first break. So please do grab yourselves a coffee, get yourselves a cold drink if you're into that. And we will be back with you in about 5 minutes' time. So it's a super quick one. We'll see you in 5.
I love coming to Shift every year. First of all, Croatia is beautiful. What's really nice about Shift as a development conference is that it really brings people from all walks of development, and you don't really see that anymore.
The vibe here is incredible. There's such a buzz everywhere. I think 1,200 people turned up. I'm looking forward to the rest of today. There's a whole other day of conference tomorrow.
I'm often baffled by not how much I learn, but how I learn that I don't know yet. So I always go home from this sort of inspired, but also just very keen to just keep on reading up on stuff and learning what I evidently did not know.
Heya, welcome back after the break. I hope you had a good one. I know it was a short but sweet one. We've got an incredible lineup carrying on for you today. If you can hear my voice, that means that we're starting again shortly. So if you are away from your screen, now's a perfect time to come back, join us and carry on engaging with us with that chat. We would love in this second half to see more of you posting about this conference and your experience online. Remember, the hashtag is #ShiftRemote. Moving on, our next speaker is a computer science major active in the field of web technologies. In 2017, he joined Pseudocode as a promising young engineer, and since then has evolved to one of the best engineers in the company in just 3 years. That's incredible. Today, he's leading the project of creating a Chrome extension which augments behavior of the Gmail application. This sounds interesting, folks. Let's welcome Ivon Bazin.
Okay, hello everyone, and thank you for joining. I'm Ivon Bazin, and I work for Pseudocode as a software engineer. And today I'll be talking about building web parasite using Chrome extension. You may be wondering why the term parasite was used, and the reason is we can attach Chrome extension to host web without its consent, and then we can add or change its behavior, and so it's kind of acts like a parasite. So that's why I chosen term parasite. But before a deep dive into Chrome extensions, let's briefly look at some Chrome extension examples and what Chrome extensions are. So Chrome extensions are software programs, and they are written using web technologies, and their purpose is to customize the browsing experience. And here are some examples. So Chrome extensions can range from as simple as showing just one icon in a browser. And here is an example, Google Mail Checker, which just displays number of unread emails in Gmail inbox. And when you click on it, it opens Gmail application. And they can range to overriding an entire page on a host web application. Here is an example HubSpot extension, which adds HubSpot functionality to Gmail Compose window, and then it integrates Gmail with HubSpot. And in this talk, we are focusing on Chrome extensions that add functionality to host web application. And for this purpose, I built a simple Chrome extension which adds a like button to YouTube. So it displays number of likes, and it's connected to Firebase Firestore to display number of likes in real time. And when user clicks on it, it will call Firebase function to increase number of likes. And you can find the source code on GitHub repository at this link. And if you would like just to play around with extension and see how it works, you can just load it, and the build is available at the drive link. For the rest of the talk, I'm going to talk about the core concepts of building a Chrome extension and how those are applied in demo extension. So Chrome extension consists of components which are shown on this picture. There is a background.js, and its purpose is to just listen on events and react on events in the background of Chrome extension. Then we have a pop-up HTML, which shows when user clicks on icon in browser, and then it gets destroyed when pop-up is closed. And both of those have full access to Chrome extension API. And then there is a content script.js, which gets injected into host web application by extension, and it can change behavior of host web. And all those components communicate with each other using Chrome message. So messages are shown on the picture as well. In order for Chrome extension to know about those components I just mentioned, we need to define those in manifest.json. And manifest.json describes the app, and it must be present in extension folder root. It is the only required file in Chrome extension. And the only three required keys are name, version, and manifest version. And this implies that minimal possible Chrome extension that you can build consists only of one file, this manifest.json, and it has only three keys, name, version, and manifest version. Even though it is valid extension and it can be loaded, this extension would be completely useless. It will just take a space in Chrome window, and it will do nothing, basically. So in order to make it useful, we need to define what permissions extension have. And in example of extension, of demo extension, there are defined three permissions. The first one is storage. So it allows Chrome extension to store some state in local storage. And in case of demo extension, we store has user already liked or not, has user already clicked on like button. And if user already clicked, we color the button to blue. And also permission to Firebase Cloud Functions, so we can make HTTP requests to cross origin. And the third one is YouTube, and it is used so we can reload tabs. So we can query YouTube tabs and reload them. And also manifest defines which files are used as extension components. So each extension can have content scripts or background or browser action, and everything is defined here. And you can notice that everything that's needed is basically JavaScript or HTML or CSS. And this means that you can use your favorite tools and libraries as long as the generated output is JavaScript, CSS, or HTML. And in demo extension, which is provided here, I used Webpack to bundle JavaScript modules. I used npm to install dependencies. Also, I used TypeScript, which is supported by tsloader Webpack configuration. And to build UI components, I use React, and those components are displayed in pop-up page and in content script. So now let's take a deeper look at each of components previously mentioned. The first one is content script, and this is a file that does the magic on the web host, and it runs in the context of the web page and gets injected to web page. They can include JavaScript, CSS, or both. By using the standard DOM, they are also able to read details of the web pages, make changes to them, and exchange info with extension they belong to. Also, they live in isolated world, meaning content scripts can make changes to its JavaScript environment without conflicting with host web or another content scripts. And for example, if a host web application has registered event listener for click on button, and we do the same from our content script, both handlers will execute. And in case of demo extension, we are adding new DOM elements to display like button and number of likes using content script. And to do so, we need to define in manifest.json how content scripts is going to be injected. In this case, we are rejecting content.js on matches YouTube. So you can provide array of URLs and array of content scripts that are going to be injected at those URLs. And with this Chrome extension, we will inject the script when web gets loaded, and script at that time will run immediately. And when inserting new elements, we should rely on DOM elements on host web we are sure will be present. And in case of demo extension, I attached new elements relatively to div with ID end, and I'm sure that this div will always exist in YouTube, so I can rely on it. And another thing is that if you are injecting content script to single page application, it can happen that your script runs before some element you rely on was created on single page application. And that was the case with YouTube. So this is where mutation observer comes handy. You can observe for changes on the DOM. And then when element gets available, you can rely on it and then just disconnect from the observer. And generally, it is a good idea to reduce the number of mounting points to one or maybe a few, and then build your UI on content script based on the route you attach somewhere. Content scripts are great for adding elements for user interaction or changing some behavior of the host web, but however, they come with some limitations. They don't have access to full Chrome extension API. For example, Chrome tabs, which is used to send message to active tab or to reload YouTube tabs in them extension. And also another example would be if you wanted to make OAuth flow to login user to application, identity API wouldn't be available as well. And another limitation is that content scripts initiate requests on behalf of the web origin that the content script has been injected into. And this means that content scripts are also subject to the same origin policy. And more precisely, content scripts have been subject to CORB since Chrome 73 and to CORS since Chrome 83. And to solve those issues, we can delegate some of the work to background script. background script is defined in manifest under background key, and it runs in background throughout the lifetime of extension, and it is used to monitor and react on some events. You can see that in demo extension, I set persistent to false, and this is encouraged because this will make script unload when it's not needed, and this will reduce system resource consumption. And in this case, event listeners should be registered at top level, which causes background to be loaded when events are fired, and unloaded when it goes idle. Also, if background needs to persist some state, it shouldn't do it in memory, but it should rather use local storage to store some state, and then we can pull it back from local storage. And this way we can use persistent false. And in case of demo extension, we used has liked Boolean to store if user has already liked or not. And some examples of events background listens to are on message event, which is triggered when some part of extension sends Chrome message. And another example would be on installed, and this is triggered when extension gets installed or updated. And this one is in demo extension is used to reload YouTube tabs so that we give chance for extension to inject content scripts to YouTube tabs. And unlike content scripts, background script has access to full Chrome extension API, so we can use tabs or identity or whichever Chrome extension API we want. And on top of that, unlike content scripts, background scripts can send HTTP requests outside of its origin, as long as extension gives permission in manifest to do so. And in demo extension, we gave permission to Firebase functions, so user can send requests to like. Now let's take a look how communication works. So this is content script, and when user clicks on like button, handle like click will run, and it will just delegate like to background script. And on the other end, in background script, we have this listener, which has to be registered at the top level, at the root of a file. And this is basically how communication works. One end sends a message, and that message can contain any valid JSON object. And then it can also send response back to the initiator of request. And you can see that here a listener for a message returns true. And this is by design required if you want to send asynchronous response, and we won't in this case. So that's why this returns only true. And then handle messages as async function, which performs like on Firebase Cloud function, and then sends response back. And also, if user hasn't already liked, it will go there and it will send a liked message to all YouTube tabs, and then content script can react to this and color the button to blue. Just a second. And also you can see that content script just sends a message type and not any payload to the message. And this is a good practice. So background has knowledge on which URL it should send HTTP request to, and content script only sends message type, and then background performs everything else. And we should always limit content script's access to cross-origin requests. In particular, do not allow content scripts to request an arbitrary URL, because malicious web page might try to impersonate the content script and make requests to any part of allowed cross-origin resource. And while we are at this file, as a side note, you can see that here I use await on local storage get, and this is not available out of the box because most of the API of Chrome extensions works on callbacks. And if we were to use a lot of callbacks, we would end up in callback hell. And this is easily avoided if you just wrap local storage method with promise, and then you can just await it. And then code looks much cleaner. And as a last component of demo extension, there is browser action. Browser action defines extension action in browser, as the name suggests. And it allows us to define which icon will be displayed for extension so that we give it visual identity. And it also lets us display HTML pop-up page when user clicks on the icon. And this page is created each time user clicks on icon, and it is destroyed when pop-up is closed, where background basically lives throughout the whole lifetime of extension, and this is not the case with pop-up. We just use it to display something when user clicks on the icon. And for this pop-up page, which shows when user clicks, it is handy to set your privacy policy links there, or maybe support links. And also, it is handy to display some context of active tab, because when you open pop-up, it is not possible to close it to change tab if pop-up is not closed. So you can display anything from the context of the currently active tab. And in demo extension, it just displays URL of the YouTube tab, and for the others, it will display that it doesn't have access to those tabs because it was not provided in permissions in manifest.json. But we could also use it for some other things. For example, if content had some state, and this pop-up page needs some state from the content, we just can send message to content script, and then content script will give us state back, and then we can rely on it. And this wraps up the elements of extension I plan to cover today. And if you have any questions, you can contact me on email, and I'll be more than glad to answer your questions. And that's it. Thank you. Thank you. Enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thank you for that, Ivon, and I really do hope that you've enjoyed our conference so far, but it is not yet over. We have one final speaker for you today, where we're looking at micro front-end architecture. We're going to bring up our next speaker, who's a 26-year-old Master of Science in Computing working at Infobit as a software engineer for the past 4 years. He's a front-end developer focusing on the technical side of web development, and currently his obsessions are front-end development, application building processes, automations, and project architecture optimizations. When he's not developing or talking on meetups, I mean, does he have the time? You might find him focusing on his hobby, which is photography, and exploring various places. Ante Tomic, thank you. We're going to welcome Ante Tomic.
Hi everyone, thank you for joining. Today I'm gonna introduce you into the world of micro frontends and how we implemented it in Infobit. So let's begin. Hi everyone, my name is Ante. I'm 26 years old software engineer who is working in Infobit for 4 years. I am more focused on the technical side of web, and recently I'm working on React, Webpack, Node.js, and generally optimization of application and project infrastructure and web processes. You will often find me holding on local meetups, and I always hope to pass my knowledges and experiences through presentation, meetups, and conferences to the other developers. So let's begin. Are we possibly using already micro frontends? Well, this is an important question, and it is likely that we are. Usually when working on projects, we are thinking about project optimization and optimizing developer experience by avoiding some sort of frequent redeploys. Usually we do that by doing some sort of separation, decomposition, or something like that. But by doing that, what we are not aware of actually, we change application architecture, and we actually implemented some sort of micro frontend without being aware of it. So let's check how is that possible. Well, the idea is not new because creating those sort of independent modules is something that exists from earlier. But if we look at micro frontend, there are more of architectural approach and a specific technique. The name is what is new, and it is actually more friendly and bulky term under which this concept actually became more popular and present. And actually, so that we can understand it better, I'm going to take an example of navigation in ePublish web interface, which is our main web product, which is actually a collection of any different projects. They can be separate application or even some parts of the application. But here we will focus on the general picture. So let's first explain what implementation we will see. Well, if we look, for example, to the screenshot, we can see a web application which contains navigation. And this is our big product, which I mentioned. So that means they are not seeing only one application. We are seeing any navigations, or more precisely, one navigation in each one of any application. So this is definitely a component that is common for every web project. Let's now look actually at the structure. We have projects, our end project, which are split up into multiple separate areas, and that makes it easier to support by multiple teams. And then our projects are Node.js projects. So that means that we have the foundation, which are libraries, dependencies like React, React DOM, Lodash, Moment, Webpack, and more. And for example, let's say that we have some additional dependencies, what is usual for the projects, or if necessary, we can have some sort of state or store management. It depends on your needs. And of course, we can always have some common parts which are usually present in all applications. And definitely at the end, we have components. Now, you saw in the previous slide that we have navigation and in that screenshot. And we know that navigation is something global in any project. So what should we do with projects like that? Well, we should extract them into a separate library, which we can then consume. But what problem do we get with that? Well, we have monolithic applications, which means that they contain everything. And even though we have separated some parts, it is still not enough because we are building and including everything into application code bundles. But what is that? Why is that a problem? Because code bundles are a static code, meaning that they don't change after we have built the application. So whenever we have some changes, we have to redeploy our application. But how could we actually solve this? Well, we can optimize our application by doing some sort of decomposition, where we will split everything into independent modules, which we can then consume in each application. Let's dive in to check what does that mean. Well, we can define micro frontends and microservices as some sort of architectural approach, and it allows us to split everything into independent multiple areas that we have mentioned. With microservices, we actually get agility and independence because each team owns their service. We also have easier deployment because we have split up everything, and one microservice is not dependent on the others. We have technological freedom because we choose what to use, and we also have resilience because if something else fails, our microservice should work without any issues. And if we apply this to micro frontends, the difference is in UI. By including micro frontends, we are avoiding monolithic UI, and which we mentioned. And let's dive in to check what does that mean and learn more. So, with micro frontends, there is no unified approach for implementing them, but we have a general goal. By splitting up our monolithic UI into smaller independent modules, we actually optimize them for feature development. And we have separate front-end modules, and each team has its own stack. Let's say, for example, we have 3 team examples. One is Team Yaran, second one is Team Pero, and third one is Team Rendo. And as we see for each team, the micro frontends are independent. They have their own build and deploy, and after we deploy them, the new feature is shipped directly to the customer without depending on anything else. And let's actually explain the core idea to better understand how did we approach this. So, we should be technology agnostic. What does that mean? Our team should be able to choose and upgrade the stack without coordinating with others. And we should be independent, what is obvious, because we shouldn't share code. And also, try to establish some sort of naming convention, especially if you have something that can't be expected there. Try to at least define some prefix or namespace or something like that. And try to rely on native browser features for communication instead of custom APIs. But if you really need an API, try to keep it as simple as possible. And lastly, your module should be resilient, similarly microservices, so if something else fails, your application should work. And it is important to say that independence is the key. A lot depends on how we do this because you can approach micro frontends multiple different ways. And to easily understand this, let's set up some conditions. So we have React, we have an project where each uses navigation and which is decomposed, and we also use Amazon Web Services and CDN. And in our application, it makes sense to extract navigation and additionally error page because they are actually common and should work consistently everywhere. So we are additionally also extracting translation system, which is not a problem here, but I wanted to mention it because it's something more complex and something we're working on unifying and providing in one place. And we are just getting started, so we will work even further on improvements. So let's actually start by checking the general picture. Our navigation module, which we have used this chosen as an example, contains build and deploy stages, and for that we use Jenkins. We are keeping them separate for a specific reason, because we want to choose by ourselves what we deploy and when do we deploy it. And that allows us to not depend like when we merge immediately available. But when we actually do run our application build, the first thing we do is determine the navigation version. This is important because we need to have that version then ready so that we can choose it during the deploy. And then with that determined version, we actually have that version as an npm package for type definition, and we have a code bundle on CDN. And when we actually do want to deploy, then we just choose the desired version and environment, and then our information will be same on Redis. Then, in web application, we actually use Redis to prepare any necessary information about things like CDN links and version, and we use our application backend for that. And then, as soon as everything is ready, we pass that information to our web interface application. And then with that information, it has everything necessary to dynamically fetch and render the navigation in client browser without issues. Then as a final result, application is loaded with navigation visible, and there is actually no change for user in comparison to what he was able to see earlier. Well, how did we approach this? Well, in application, we actually resolve navigation dynamically right before we need it. Why? Well, we did this asynchronously to ensure that navigation is loaded before the application. We are not affecting performance and UI here because we are patching the bundle very quickly, like it takes maybe 50 to 80 milliseconds. But when we actually do load the bundle, it makes everything available so that we can consume the navigation thanks to Windows scope. But we are not done here. Why? Because as we have some dependencies that we share, we actually have them in Windows scope so that we can consume them in navigation with externals. We will explain soon why, but we basically just resolve them in ECMAScript style imports. So let's continue, and then we will return to explore why we did this. First, I want to talk about development. When we develop modules, we have two environments, local development and production build. And production is easy because our module is loaded into applications and we can immediately see the result because we can easily test if everything works. But local development is a challenge because we need to ensure that everything is working the same like in production. And also, everything should be in one repository, and you should avoid monorepos as they are anti-patterns and don't allow you to take advantage of organizational benefits you have in independent teams and applications, micro frontend, of course. So, when we have our modules, they actually consist of two parts, expose modules and demo page for local development. Demo page includes expose modules because we want to show what are we expecting in production. And also, we need some sort of web application server, like for example, Webpack Dev Server, which will allow us to touch the application. And sometimes you also need API requests, and it is a good practice to ensure that you have the same functionality locally and in production. Like you can use some sort of HTTP proxy server, but it's up to you. And also, it is important to remember that your module should be independent, so absolutely no dependency on the other development environments of the other teams, something like that. And why did next now return to our approach? Why did we do this? Well, like other developers, we decided to go with our own implementation because of our needs and requirements, and also because of optimization of navigation bundle. This helped us significantly because we reduced the bundle size by 60%. And the third and main reason is ensuring a single version of dependencies, especially for React libraries. So let's check the code below and what I have ordered in red. We had this issue and we learned this the hard way because we had shared components using React hooks and our micro frontend application kept crashing. And after a little bit of investigation, we realized that having even multiple copies from React, even from the same folder in non-module, still causes us the issue. And we have two more main reasons. The first is less complexity. And by breaking up the application into smaller parts, we can actually deploy those parts independently. And then, when we actually use them, it is easier to maintain those projects because they are notably smaller and we are not depending on anything else because we can update microservice modules by ourselves. But we can also use some existing solution. Here we have, for example, three categories: client-side frameworks, which allow us for client-side micro frontends, and server-side rendering. Server-side frameworks, which are usually libraries or frameworks for Node.js Express, but can also roll some sort of services into your infrastructure. And helper libraries, which are our desired solution, because we can have some sort of infrastructure for sharing dependencies or even bringing together micro frontends. And we will here we'll mention one implementation that is worth mentioning, and this is module federation from Webpack. But first, let's actually check a little bit more about all solutions. And here we can see one interesting trend. We have client-side and server-side frameworks, which are less popular. And the other side, we have helper libraries like Postal and SingleSpa, which are the most popular, but still far from popular libraries. But what does this tell us? Well, developers are getting interested into micro frontends, and as expected, they're starting to gain more and more traction. But let's actually now dive into module federation and the downsides of our approach. Well, we have a lot of manual work because you have to do everything by yourself. And you have to learn modules, script tags, or demand loading, dynamic loading, basically everything. And here is the problem as well, because we have to resolve shared dependencies, and we mentioned already the problems we have. And implementing your own solution actually has a lot of trial and error because you have to make sure that everything is working properly and you need time to properly implement everything and test. But can we improve this? Well, there is a room for improvements. Yeah, You are right. But you have to be aware of something. There is no perfect solution, and you will have good and bad sides for absolutely everything. And actually, the most important thing you can do is improve developer and customer experience. So think about build, web performance, and especially automation so that you can have less work. Less manual work. So you can even consider different solutions. So for example, let's check module federation. If we actually take module federation and compare with our solution first, we can see 4 main improvements here. But we have automation and less manual work, which are problems because we can't achieve them with externals at the moment. And we can get good build performance by automating bundles. For example, good web performance by dynamically loading everything before we need it and only what we need, or to some extent share dependencies with Windows. But let's dive into module federation because automation does make a difference here. And what is the idea is module federation? It's basically the same, separate application paths. We want to have separate builds, and then we call each one of those separate builds containers. We can reference container either directly in application or in other container. And then we have a relationship. Relationship where we have a container we want to include is remote, and consumer of container, the one who is using it, is the host. Remote can export the modules to the host and then can use them. And then when we use those modules, we actually call them remote modules. And this also means that we have separate builds, like we are intending to, or bring us independence and much better build performance. But what actually happens under the hood? Well, we usually have exposed like Apex modules which are normal. And here we specify what do we want to expose so that hosts that we mentioned in previous slide can consume them. We do this asynchronously, but allows builds to put each exposed module in a separate file with all necessary dependencies, and also ensures good web performance because we download only what we really need. And another thing that we solve is shared modules. We have something that we want to share across multiple micro frontends. And here we actually save information with version to the share scope. And then we can also consume them. And when we consume them, we check the necessary version, and we get from the shared scope the highest available version, which meets our version check requirement. And also, we do this async way as well, which means that we have no download codes and we download only what we really use. And let's actually talk about our choice for external solutions. We chose it because we have N projects and we wanted to start with gradual implementation. Because we also wanted more instant results, incoming navigation updates we had and requirements, and we wanted a good starting point. And when we actually were choosing what to do, we had client-side server-side frameworks for which we knew that would take too long, and then because of that, we knew that we had to go with our own solution or with some sort of helper library. But this doesn't mean that we are not looking into other solutions. We are actually waiting for Webpack 5 to be out of beta, and then we are planning to test module federation and even possibly use it and implement it. So I think that the future is really bright. But remember, migrating to micro frontends is complex and definitely not trivial. So it's better to definitely do it slice by slice and improving along the way. But let's also talk about root shared topics. We have some, as we are all about working in teams and independent modules. And we should share a good end result and avoid the random work. And let's take our already mentioned team Yaran, Pero, and Rendo, and we assume we have more teams like, for example, Team Duje. And each team shouldn't be the one to reinvent the wheel. And here, it is a good idea to share knowledge, ideas, or implementations with the other teams through either presenting your solution or through some sort of community of practice. If you're interested, you can Google more about it. And also, for each one of those 4 or even more teams, it is good to have some sort of consistent look and feel for your customers or clients. And we can do that by having a common design system. And lastly, web performance is very important because you should have fast response time, as small bundle as possible, and you can ensure that by shipping less code in the browser, what will result in a better load time. And now, before we finish, let's actually summarize micro frontends. So they are useful for optimizing development because they improve development speed for features. We also have no monoliths, and we are able to keep changing and improving our project because we have local decision making and we can eliminate legacy code. And there is also independence, as we have a lot of self-contained modules and no shared code between different projects. And since they are lighter, we can run them with less computing resources. But because each micro frontend has its own stack, you have to maintain everything separately, what can lead to some sort of redundancy. But this may be avoidable with module federation. And if you need some sort of information or data from the other teams, you may have to support their structure or their response or something like that. So you may have to think about consistency. And one thing I want to especially mention is heterogeneity, which is one of more controversial things. And just because you can be technology agnostic, in my opinion, it doesn't mean that you should pick a different technology stack because there is a thing as too much variety. For example, in InfoBip, we avoided this by always using technologies like Node.js and React, which allowed us to avoid this. But also, we said that local development can be a challenge. And lastly, I wanted to mention that micro frontends are great for medium and large projects, but they may be some sort of overkill for smaller teams and small amount of developers, especially if you already have very good communication. And your takeaway from all of this should be this. Micro frontends are worth all the fuss. They help us a lot with optimizing everything in InfoBip, especially since we have end projects and we are planning to continue to use and improve our solution. But for your projects, definitely take time to analyze and then decide what to do. And remember, there is no perfect solution. Pick up the solution that works best for your needs and just try implementing it on one or smaller parts, basically what I said, slice by slice, and if everything works well, then expanding to more global level. And before wrapping up, I just want to share something. I have prepared a little reference list where you can check framework and some other things that I have mentioned. And I used some of those links to actually prepare this presentation, and I even added some tips and tricks. So I really hope that you will check the link above and that it will be very useful for you. And thank you all, and I'm looking forward to checking your questions. So if you have anything, feel free to ask. Thank you.
Thank you, Ante. And with that, that brings us to the end of our second in this 12-part series of Shift Remote. Once again, it's been great, hasn't it? I'm sure that wherever we are in the world, it's so nice that we can still engage and still get to be part of that Shift experience. If you have loved it, please do tell us about that using the hashtag ShiftRemote. If you haven't, then don't. No, only kidding. We'd love to hear from you anyway. Love to end just with saying another thank you. Thank you to the team at Shift. Thank you to Ivon in particular, but also another thank you to our sponsors that once again are Microsoft, InfoBip, Autodesk, Microblink, Barrage, Azure Idea, ICT, Japania, Venture, Pseudocode 5, Ars Futura, Nanobit, Infinuum, 9 Dots, Get By Bus, Aspira, Code Anywhere and Pluggy. Thank you so much. Your support and your ongoing support means a lot to us. As I said at the start of this conference, it is not yet over at all, folks. We've got another one coming up for you in just 2 days where we'll be focusing specifically on JavaScript. So if you haven't already, once again, please do register and we hope to see you soon. Thank you from myself and also thank you from all of us here at Shift. Take care.